A teenager lost a contact lens while playing basketball in his driveway. After a brief search, he gave up. His mother took up the cause and within minutes found the lens. How did you do that? He asked. We weren't looking for the same thing, she explained. You were looking for a small piece of plastic. I was looking for $150. Hello, and welcome again to another episode of My Money, My Rules. By now, I'm hoping that you have listened to episode 2 and episode 6. Episode 2 talked about budgeting, and it talked about the very first steps of budgeting, which I'm going to go over shortly. And episode 6 talked about basically how to give yourself a raise, 4 different ways to give yourself a raise. And it talked about subtracting before adding, which I'm also going to get to in a moment. This is going to be this episode here is going to be part 2 of budgeting. So I want to talk a little bit about the philosophy of budgeting, though, and I want to talk about actually kind of the psychology of budgeting and what's going on in your head. We talked about how in episode 2, we talked about that the budget should not be a bad word at all. I mean, budget should be a good word. We attach so much negativity to that word, I think. I think whenever we hear that word, we picture ourselves in handcuffs, like we can't do this, we can't do that. But actually, nothing could be further from the truth. It will actually set you free. You set it up correctly, that budget will set you free. Now, how does that happen? Well, it happens because you are in charge of it. You're the one who says where all the money goes. And something that's very important is that you know exactly where it's going. When you don't have a budget, you will spend money and you will not know where it went. And there's nothing worse than that. You will ultimately be happier having a budget if for no other reason but because you know where your money is going. But you get to budget things for fun too. And so knowing where your money is going, being able to budget things for fun, that's a great combination. So remember that whenever you're thinking about budgeting, make it a good word. It is a good word and it's a good thing. It'll make you feel better. Budgeting is kind of like eating right. You know, everyone already knows that they're supposed to do it. You just have to decide to do it. But you might need some help on the how, and that's why I'm here. I tell you, whenever we feel like we get in danger sometimes, whenever we feel like we have a lot of something, we may not budget. Let's say that a good analogy for that is like saying gas in your car. Whenever your car is filled with gas and you're driving around doing whatever it is that you need to do in your car, it feels like you have a lot. So you sort of drive it very, not so conservatively, right? Might hit the gas more, doing things that you shouldn't do that you're going to use a lot of gas on. But what happens when it gets really close to empty? I'm talking down there on E, whenever you see that little gas light come on, how do you drive it then? Suddenly you're really responsible with it. Why is it we do that? Why is it we do that? Why do we feel like we have a lot of something and therefore we can waste it? But when it gets down to almost nothing, that's when we start paying attention to it. We got to stop doing that. Okay. You've got to stop doing that if you're doing that. Another analogy would be kind of like the stock market analogy. Whenever, the stock market's going sky high, everybody wants to get in on it. And then people get in on it a little bit too late. And therefore they end up losing money because they waited too long. They should have conserved their way through it. And I'm going to talk more about that in a later episode as well. That's my favorite subject to talk about, in fact. So you need to think in terms of doing the same thing all the time, whether you have a lot of it or you have a little of it. If you've got a lot of gasoline in your car, use it as if you were almost empty. Okay. Drive it very responsibly so that you can stretch your money a long way. Okay. Now, the effect of budgeting. Here's another way that I want you to feel when you budget. How do you feel after you've been at work and you get home? Let's say that it's just been a hard day at work or whatever. You're finally home. How do you feel? You probably feel really good. Now, some of you might be saying to yourselves, well, I feel tired. Yeah, I get that. Okay, you feel tired. But do you feel better or worse? You usually feel better coming home. It's your place. It's your rules when you're there. You get to rest and probably your heart rate goes down even. You get to relax and you feel so much better when you're home. Your budget should give you a very similar feeling, actually. Okay, so these things that I've said on the philosophy and the psychology of budgeting, please don't forget them, because it should never, ever feel like it really shouldn't feel like much work doing it, actually. You set it up correctly, it won't feel like work, and you will feel so much better. It'll feel like a weight has been lifted off of you. Now, I have another analogy for you, by the way. And this is going back to episode 6. This was the previous episode where I was talking about how to give yourself a raise, the 4 ways to give yourself a raise. And as you heard that title, you were probably thinking, oh, I get to add to my money. Well, in a way you do, but you can't add until you learn to subtract. And let me tell you what I mean by that again. I said it in the previous episode, but it's important enough to bring up here because we're going to be talking about budgeting, right? So think about what happens whenever you subtract the amount that you spend. You automatically give yourself a raise when you do that. And you have to do that before you learn how to add. You have to do that before you add to your income. You have to. Why do that first? Well, let me put it to you this way. Let's say you've got one person that's making, say, $25,000 a year. Okay, and let's say that they're spending, well, we'll just say 98% of it. They're spending 98% of what they earn, which essentially means they're living paycheck to paycheck, right? Now, let's say that you got another person that's making $250,000 a year. All right. Now, let's say that they're also spending 98% of what they make. They're also living paycheck to paycheck. Okay. The temptation when you make more to spend more is there, and you got to not do it. Okay. Because you know that if you were to make, 250,000 a year, whatever, you could save plenty if you wanted to. Or that poor person that's only making, say, $25,000 a year, maybe even less than that, it's hard for them to live. I mean, it's hard for them to put back anything. So you've got to learn to subtract first, because you should not get a raise until you've learned to subtract. Okay. Let me go ahead and go over those 4 ways. Okay. First, put 10% back of your paycheck always. That's one way to give yourself a raise. Number 2 that I talked about in the last episode was apply the law of halves. If you need less, if you can use half of what you would normally use in terms of things that you use constantly, like toothpaste or the gasoline in your car, even whatever it is you can do to cut down, do that. Go back to episode 6 and listen to that more in detail if you need to hear it. Another one, I said to learn to cook something. And I said in the last episode, even though you're learning to cook, it doesn't mean you have to learn to cook, 10 different things. You can start with just one thing. And I was recommending water-based soups because they're usually really easy to make and they go a long way, and you could freeze them. And then the last thing I said was drive your car better. And I gave you all kinds of ways to drive your car better. Everything from inflating your tires to getting a better mileage car if you can, to making sure you're not carrying too much in your car, too much weight, if you have that available. And I went over a whole bunch of other ways. So go back and listen to those. Those are the 4 ways you can give yourself a raise right there. Okay. Now, going back to the budget in episode 2, I had said it was just going to be a very, very easy budget to make at first, because it was only like a step 1. I told you to have 3 different columns. I told you then in the first column, you needed to write down all the bills where you know how much they are and you know when they are. Okay. An example that would be rent or your mortgage payment. You know how much it is, you know when it is. I told you in the second column to put all the things where you know when you're going to pay them, but you don't know exactly how much they're going to be. That was things like utilities, because you pay your utilities at the same time pretty much every month, but you don't know exactly how much they're going to be. And then in the third column, I told you to do ones where you don't know how much they're going to be and you don't know how often they are. Now, that's a lot of stuff, okay? That's clothing. You can think of a lot of different things for that, because I wanted you to have somewhat of an idea after doing this about how much money you need a month on average. You should have a much better idea with this than not doing it at all. But again, that was just the first step. Go back and listen to episode 2 if you need to hear that again, okay? So hopefully, though, in column 3, the ones where you don't know how much and you don't know when, I'm hoping that you at least have it to, say, the nearest $100 to $300, or maybe at least to the nearest $500 of how much money you're going to need each month on those bills where you don't know how much they're going to be and you don't know when they are. Hopefully, you've got somewhat of an idea. But I tell you what, if that's still too hard for you, that's what this episode is for. I'm going to go ahead and give you a tip, all right? It's time to roll up our sleeves. I'm going to give credit where credit is due. I'm going to talk about the envelope system. Now, anybody that's listened to Dave Ramsey knows what the envelope system is, right? Envelope system is simply well, actually, I'll tell you the way I do it, taking 4 different envelopes, writing week 1, week 2, week 3, and week 4 on those envelopes, and putting as much cash in there each week as you know that you need for groceries or whatever you need to spend cash. Now, here's where I'm going to add something. That's what Dave Ramsey would tell you to do, is to have the money in there, and once you run out, you're out and you can't spend anymore. However, this is what I'm going to tell you to do. I'm going to add something to it, but this is going to be temporary. What I want you to do is I want you to fill up those 4 envelopes, and I want you to, as soon as you spend them, you're also going to take the receipts of whatever you were spending the money on, and you're going to put it back inside that envelope. So let's say that you're on week 1 and you've got, and I'm just making up numbers here. Let's say you got 500. Okay. I don't know how much it is. It could be drastically more or less. I don't know. But let's say that it's $500 and you feel like you have to spend $500 a week. Okay. After you spend it, you ought to have $500 worth of receipts in that envelope. Okay. And then you'll do the same thing for week 2, 3, and 4. Now you'll do this for at least 3 months. Okay. 3 months you will do this. And you will hopefully have an idea then of how much money you needed. And I want to go back to, let me go back to that first month. During that first month, you might find, oh, I thought I had enough for week 1, but realistically speaking, I need more. Okay, well, if you need more, just go ahead and put more in there just for that first month. Okay, that way you'll have all the receipts that you need in there. Okay, and then do it in month 2 and hopefully it gets more accurate. And then after month 3, you ought to have a pretty solid idea now of how much money you need per month. And then you'll put that in the 4 envelopes, divided by 4, put it in the 4 envelopes. And yes, there's not exactly 4 weeks every month, but we're only missing like 2.5 days on average there or something like that. So try doing that. Okay. If you don't know and you feel like you cannot figure out how much you need to spend each week, keep doing it for 3 months like this, even if you have to cheat a little bit because you just simply didn't know. And then after that 3rd month, you ought to know, and then you'll know exactly how much you need to be putting in the envelopes for month number 4. Okay. And then you need to spend what's in that envelope and no more, the cash that you had put in there and no more. So again, I'll go ahead and quick review on this. I feel like I went kind of fast with it. Got 4 envelopes because there's roughly 4 weeks in a month. Okay. You write down week 1, 2, 3, and 4 on week 1 on one envelope, week 2 on one envelope. You put a certain amount of cash in week 1, and it'll be probably the same amount of cash for week 2, 3, and 4. And you're hoping that that's about what you're going to spend each of those weeks. If you go over, well, then you had to add some, okay? But at least it gave you a realistic amount that you can look for and adjust for month 2 to make it more correct. And you're going to be putting receipts in those envelopes. That way, when the month ends, you can go back and look at things and be like, okay, I had meant to spend 500 in the first week and I did everything I possibly could, but it was actually 550 I needed. Well, okay, great. What happened in month number 2? Did you still need 550 or was it even more or less? Find out where that is. It might be an average. Maybe that's what you have to do. But after 3 months, you ought to have a pretty solid idea of how much money you need every month and every week, okay, to spend. And you can spend cash on most things, by the way, but if for some reason you can't, and you're thinking, oh man, I've got to do debit cards for some things because maybe for some reason you don't have a choice or a credit card, but hopefully you can use a debit card, then just put the receipt in there, okay? Put the receipt in there and see where that's going, okay? And adjust it accordingly if you just have a few where you just have to pay with a debit card or credit card because that's the way your bill's set up. Okay, I'm hoping that makes sense to you. It's really pretty easy once you get going on it. If you need to listen to this again, by all means, listen to it. And, if you're watching this on YouTube, write in the comments. If there's something you need answered, I'll go ahead and answer it. Not a problem. And if you're listening on the podcast, of course, I think there's a way you can email through there. Okay. I want to remind you too that there's probably going to be some sort of an internal conflict, okay, as this is happening because there's 2 different yous. There are 2 different yous, and I understand that. There's a you that says, what is the point of working so hard if I don't get to spend any of the money I make? Then there's the other you that says, I need to budget a little bit. I just need to budget something. What's the answer to that? The answer to that problem, there's always going to be that conflict, especially at first, because whenever you're trying to change habits, that takes time. However, and I can't stress this enough, I mentioned this in episode 2, you need to budget something for fun. Okay. Be realistic with it. Something that you can budget for fun. It's sort of like a reward for keeping to your budget. And it shouldn't be very much because it really shouldn't take too much. Maybe you like to drink coffee once a day. Okay. There it is. Maybe that's the thing you like to do. Maybe you're going to the movies. Maybe you're doing, there's a whatever it is that you do that you just really love, but it's not too expensive and you can budget for it. Do it because it'll be kind of like a reward. You like ice cream, budget ice cream. There's not going to be very much you're going to spend on that. Remember that. You don't just go and just spend everything you have with what's left. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying budget just a tiny bit of money so that you can reward yourself for budgeting, because I think you're more likely to keep up with it if you do that. That's going to do it for this episode. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the comment section. And don't forget to like and subscribe as always. And I look forward to the next episode. And remember, if you don't have a plan for your money, somebody else does. Take care.